This is a big break from the past AI that require the coding skills. With a single foundation model, we can handle so many tasks, translations or proofreading or summarization. In the era of deep research, what's left for human analysts for the investment analysis? I think it's more softer side of the process. That is, for example, accessing the private information and insights that exist only in people's head. My view is that within the investment process, the LLM can improve a lot on the analysis side, the information collection and analysis, and not so much on the portfolio management or decision-making part.
You have just heard from Michinori Kanokogi, the head of solution research at Nissay Asset Management. He leads the research and development of digital investment solutions for investors. Previously, he headed the launch of AQR Capital Management's Japan business as head of investment management. So let us dive right in.
Thank you very much, Kanokogi-san, for joining us today and taking the time. Obviously, AI is a very hot topic, and asset management in Japan, becoming an asset management nation, is a national target. We are curious how you, as an insider, see this all developing. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nobat-san. And good evening, everyone. I'm Mich Kanokogi, working for Nissay Asset Management now. And thank you for joining tonight's webinar. And I put the title as How Generative AI is Transforming Asset Management. Quick background of myself. So that I studied computer engineering and joined PwC Consulting in 1999, where I met Nobat-san, and I was fresh new grad out of the engineering school. After that, my career was a mix of consulting and asset management. The recent focus is on asset management side. I've been working for Nissay Asset Management for over 4 years now. My primary responsibility is for the digital transformation of my company, and my primary focus is applying generative AI to our asset management business. I wrote this book, How Generative AI is Transforming Asset Management, and it was published January this year. Okay, let's begin. I have 4 parts tonight. And the first is the introduction, the impact of GenAI and impact of GenAI for asset management company. AI has been around for the 40, 50 years now, depending on the definition. But I do think the recent AI, the generative AI or LLM, large language model, it's quite different from the previous version of AI. The why this AI is different, so I think the 2 words, usability and versatility. So anyone who can type can now benefit from the cutting edge or state-of-the-art large language models, and they can work across languages, formats, and jobs. This is a big break from the past AI that require the coding skills. With a single foundation model, we can handle so many tasks, translations or proofreading or summarization. But the previous version of the natural language processing AIs, we have to purposely build the specific AIs, and we have to model the neural network and train the model with the specific training data. But now you can use the GPT 4.1, 4.3 or Claude model for various tasks. So this is what economists call the general purpose technology. There's a list of 24 technologies for the whole human history that affect an entire economy, usually at the global level. So it starts from the domestication plants and animals, and steam engines, railways, and more recently, the computers or internet counted as general purpose technologies. And this paper is about the recent GPT, which is the ChatGPT, generative pre-trained transformer. It's likely a 25th general purpose technology. The adoption will therefore be very vast and fast. Inside an asset manager, generative AI reaches far beyond quants who was the preliminary beneficiary of the previous version of AI. So investment teams, operations, compliance, even HR, or even the president himself can benefit from the generative AI. Let's move on to the next section, GenAI 101, to understand a bit of the mechanics of how GenAI or large language model works. So you can understand the strengths and weaknesses of these models. Large language models essentially are giant probability engines. They read the prompt from the users and the preceding text, and basically they predict the next word, and they continue to do this process. What they do is calculate conditional probabilities or probability distribution and repeatedly sample according to these probabilities to generate text. Because of these generation processes, there are some randomness in the generated text. So even if we give the same prompt, we get the different result, different text every time. That's how LLMs generate text. So that is why LLMs have some strengths and weaknesses. They are good at text generation, summarize the long text, and they are extremely good at programming. And they can handle multilingual abilities. They are also good at the idea generation and brainstorming. But they have some weaknesses. It's not very intuitive for us because they are computers, but they are not good at calculations or data aggregations. This is because, as we saw in our demo, they are essentially next word predictor. So they don't have any internal mechanism to arithmetics or any calculation. And of course, they don't know the latest information. So their knowledge is limited to the training data they get. This is famous, what we call hallucination. They tend to tell plausible lies. And as I said, they have some randomness in the text generation. Lastly, they are not good at logical thinking or reasoning. These strengths and weaknesses is a kind of the original weaknesses when we saw the first ChatGPT in the late 2022. But since then, they had some improvement in the application or implementation of these LLMs. The model itself have improved. So these weaknesses are being dealt in many ways. As for calculations, they implemented a mechanism named code interpreter, where the ChatGPT write a Python code and run the code to get the calculated result and display the result. In this way, they are now very good at calculations or data analysis. And they have built the web search capability to reach to the latest information. And for the hallucination problem, so the web search benefits to reduce hallucination. And we have other technologies named RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, to make the generated text more grounded to the fact. For randomness, we have a prompting technique called self-consistency. For logical thinking, we have a prompting technique named chain of thoughts. I will explain it later about the recent development in reasoning model. OpenAI's O1 or O3 greatly improves the reasoning or logical thinking capability of LLM. So let's move on to zoom into our industry, asset management. So Nissay Asset Management. We think of GenAI infrastructure as 3 layers. The first layer is a general chat interface. This is ChatGPT or Gemini. And through general chat interface, we accept the ad hoc usage of all users. Actually, we have an infrastructure that the user can select from 3 major LLMs, GPT and Claude and Gemini. The second layer is based on the custom data. We can upload internal documents, Word documents or PDF, and generate text based on these internal documents. For this one, we use the Google's Notebook LLM. The third layer is the specialized apps. We build or develop some specific application, LLM-based application for a particular task. And I will give you some example for this. With the GenAI infrastructure, we need the 3 players to play each role to make AI work within a company. I borrowed this chart from the Professor Ethan Morick of the Wharton School. She says the leadership and lab and crowd has to play a role to make the AI impactful for corporate. The leadership, basically, they need to set vision and guardrails. And lab is something like myself for the people who are responsible for digital transformation. So we are in charge of prototyping or preparing infrastructure for the crowd. The crowd is basically all employees. They are the ones who come up with the actual transformation because the GenAI technology is for everyone. So everyone has to experiment with their own work on how they can utilize AI in their own business process. Speaking of leadership's role, this is a kind of extreme example of leadership role. I took it from last month's Bloomberg News, and he is the CEO of Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And he now says that it can't be voluntary to use AI. If you don't use it, you will never be promoted or you won't get a job. I think this is an extreme shape of leadership. But one of the leaders' responsibilities is to demonstrate how AI should be used or share the vivid AI vision. Another example of the leadership's role is what we did in our company. We conducted hands-on lectures for all company executives. We have 20 executives in Nissay Asset Management, and we hold 3 one-hour sessions for executives to really get the hands-on experience to use GenAI. Let them use GenAI to understand the strengths and weaknesses through mock exercises. We asked each executive to make a presentation to the president on how they can utilize this technology in their own area of business. So this is the one example of the top-down initiative. As a bottom-up initiative, we appointed a total of 55 what we call GenAI navigators. They are basically evangelists within each team to conduct the knowledge transfers and identify use cases within each department. Through the top-down and bottom-up initiative, we managed to improve the usage rate, and our monthly active users over 80%. These are the use cases of generative AIs in asset management business. Of course, these are non-exclusive lists. We can find new use cases on daily basis. With all employees experimenting AI for their daily jobs, we can find the new use cases day to day. To give you some examples, some investment front office people are using the GenAI to write a code to process the capital call notifications for the private investment fund. Some of them are generating monthly market commentary using GenAI. They use the daily comments collected from the sell side, and they use GenAI to summarize these daily comments to come up with monthly market commentary. Of course, legal and compliance department is using GenAI extensively. They use GenAI for the detection of insider information. They are monitoring telephone calls of our analysts and portfolio managers to detect insider information. Now they are using GenAI for this purpose. This is one example of the top of our infrastructure, the specified the tool, LLM tool. We have developed ESG interview assist, a custom-built application to analyze the corporate disclosures, like annual reports or sustainability reports. This system extract the ESG related information from these documents based on our proprietary evaluation criteria and come up with some summaries and evaluation. So this is an example of the purposely built tools that can do much more than these two layers of generic infrastructure. It will briefly touch on the risk of generative AIs because some companies have difficulty in promoting the use of GenAI because of the concerns on these risks. I think the risk of applying the generative AI for company have mainly three parts, and the risk of information leakage and the generation of inaccurate or inappropriate content and risk of copyright violation. I do think we have mitigation for each. For information leakage, we can select the appropriate technology stack to mitigate the risk of information leakage. So I don't go into details, but for inaccurate or inappropriate generation, these are the hallucinations or biases of GenAI. It is controlled by guidelines for the employees. We state in our guidelines that GenAI's work product is essentially your work product. So you have to verify it's a GenAI's output. And the same for copyright violation. In our guidelines, we put something like this. Do not input the existing copyrighted works or author names or work titles into prompt. You may know that the recent discussion on the Ghibli-like images, right? We prohibit these kind of prompts to be used within our company. We do have some risks of using GenAI, but nowadays risks of not using GenAI is much bigger than the risk of using GenAI. This is a document published from Japan FSA back in March. The document is called AI Discussion Paper, and even Japan FSA state in this document that financial institutions must be acutely aware of the risk of not taking actions. So they are basically promoting the use of this new technology. There are some real risks of not using or not promoting GenAI for now. If you don't have a proper GenAI infrastructure, people will start using their own ChatGPT on the smartphone. That is much dangerous than providing the corporate infrastructure. Of course, there will be some implications for talent acquisition and retention. Nowadays, people don't want to work in a company that will prohibit the AI usage, right? And especially there is an implications on competitive advantage. The last part, let's look at the future of asset management. Late last year, we saw some paradigm shift in GenAI. That is called test time scaling or inference time scaling. These are new types of large language models like OpenAI's O1, O3, or Claude 3.7 or Gemini 2.5. These models think carefully before answering. They use more computing time and computing power before generating their answers. This leads to the kind of dramatic improvement in the LLM's abilities. This chart illustrates the performance of reasoning model. This is kind of benchmark testing of LLMs. So the Google proof Q&A, and this is a PhD level question and answers for the scientific topics. And we saw a huge improvement in the performance once we got this reasoning model like O1 and O3. And this improvement in LLM's ability for reasoning or planning or logical thinking expand the potential of AI agents, which became a buzzword in this year. The previous version of GenAI responds to user prompts, or at best, they can ground their answers using the RAG technology based on the internal documents. But with the new types of LLM, AI can now act like an agent, because they can now reach to the company data or internal systems or external systems through API. They can handle the much more complex task than the previous version of LLMs. These developments have led to a particularly impressive new functions, which is deep research. Many of you have seen this development. OpenAI have released its deep research capability in February this year. This is a specifically trained O3-based model, which is good at web browsing and reasoning tasks. So they search the web for 10-15 minutes and gather so much information to come up with a very comprehensive report. This research capability is quite impressive, I think. This has big implications for our company's investment process, actually. And I do think our investment analyst work will change dramatically in the era of deep research, because if the information is public and can be reached through internet, deep research can collect and analyze this public information much efficiently than humans. They can do it in 10-15 minutes compared to the average level human analyst that may take 1 or 2 days. In the era of deep research, what's left for human analysts for the investment analysis? I think it's more softer side of the process. That is, for example, accessing the private information and insights that exist only in people's head. So now the humans needs to exercise their interview skills or communication abilities for the interviewing with the corporate management. And they need to build trust to get the proper information. In addition, human analysts need to exercise the 5 senses or feel the vibes or atmosphere when they visit the corporate or when they attend the investor relations meetings. They need to exercise any senses that these AIs cannot exercise. Another challenge I think we have for the era of GenAI is how to train our investment analyst. Because I think the ability to ask appropriate questions to AI or expertise to critically review AI's output, the necessary features for human analysts. But these skills require some experience to acquire, and it's very difficult for the deep research era. Developing junior analysts will be a challenge because the senior analyst can do the work with deep research much more efficiently than asking junior analysts to do the work. So we don't have a clear answer for this question, but I think this challenge will be posed to any part of the work, not only for the analyst. I think AI can play some role of training or coaching junior analysts. There is a possibility of using AI for the training, the junior staff for this one. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I now ask for the questions, opinions, or discussions.
Thank you very much, Kanokogi-san. I've got quite a few questions written down, but if anybody in the audience wants to go first, please raise your hand. Connor is asking, what is the cost of AI licenses that you use at Nissay Asset Management?
The cost of this infrastructure and the use of GenAI. I said that we have a choice from the OpenAI, Claude, and Gemini model. To be more specific, we have built an internal or proprietary infrastructure to use OpenAI and Claude models through API. We pay these two LLM providers based on the usage of API. So based on the volume of our prompts and responses. And actually the cost is not very high. It's like 100,000 yen or 200,000 yen per month for the whole company. We have 700 employees in a company and we have more than 80% adoption rate. But the API cost is still that range. And I think it's quite cheap for the benefit we are getting. Actually, for Gemini, the story is different because as a corporate, we use the Google Workspace as an office suite. So we use email for email and we use Google Calendar. And with some 10-20% additional payment, we can use the Gemini Advanced, the AI functionalities. So basically, that's the cost we are paying.
Maybe a follow-up to that is you're saying it's relatively cheap for the benefits that you're getting. And obviously the macro picture in Japan is that we have this at least perceived labor shortages. So do you have a sense developed already what level of productivity improvements you're getting? So let's say you had an analyst department of 10 people. Could you do the same work with 7 or could you manage 30% more? What's your sense at the stage you're at currently?
That's the difficult part to quantify, right? We are the Japanese company and it's really difficult for us to fire any people, even if we get the productivity improvement. But I do think in our rough estimate, we get something around 30-minute productivity gains per day for each employee. And we come up with annual cost savings. So we can come up with this kind of estimate. But it's really difficult to demonstrate or say, hey, we can reduce this amount of workforce or something like that.
Got it. Thank you. I think we have questions once more on the accuracy of the output. I think you covered that in your presentation, but maybe a short recap of the guardrails that are there to ensure that it doesn't hallucinate and you get correct output, especially when you're dealing with financial data.
As I said, I demonstrate how LLM generate text. So by nature, LLM doesn't have a way to demonstrate whether they producing the right content. This is the natural behavior of LLM. But nowadays, they have some improvement. They have developed a way to LLM's output more grounded with the latest web search information or grounded with the company's internal document through retrieval augmented generation. And these are great ways to reduce hallucination. And the recent deep research capabilities, the reports generated through deep research are grounded with the web search. That does not mean that there are not a single hallucination, and we have to be critical about the LLM output. But I think it's the same for any reports generated by humans, right? That is why we put in our GenAI guidelines. So you have to verify LLM's output as if it was the work product of yourself. You always need to proofread or do the forward check for any document you generate. We ask our employees to do the same level of verification before publishing the output.
Thank you. Also connected to that, I think only last week there was a new paper out. There's a new paper out from Sakana AI every week, but last week's paper was specifically on analyzing financial statements of Japanese companies. There is clearly some focus on that of seeing a business opportunity across the field. But how do you make sure that these specific use cases, you're already running the 3 foundation models, you can't always go with the hottest thing that was last week. So maybe sometimes you need to wait, 2 months until you get something similar on Google or OpenAI. How do you handle this novelty factor, especially as the person who's gatekeeping what goes into the company, right? Your business leads would come, all right, this is great. You're saying that came from Sakana AI. I want to use it. Can we use it? How do you manage expectations in that regard?
Good question. There are so many academic papers or the releases from the big tech companies for the new capability of LLMs. And we are keen to monitor this, and we try to incorporate the new result as much as possible. But talking to the Sakana AI's recent release in financial domain, one thing is that they have developed a new benchmark data to evaluate the quality of LLM, and specifically they built upon the corporate disclosure. They have built a benchmark data set so that the users or developers like us can use to evaluate our own LLM built application and the quality of the LLM application. And this is a great contribution to the industry, because without the proper evaluation of the quality of output, it's really difficult to develop and apply a new technology or new capability to the business process. I think the evaluation of the LLM quality is the key for adoption, because these systems are different from the traditional computer system, which is meant to work as specified. But the LLM can do some unexpected behavior from time to time. So the evaluating the behavior is much, much more important than the previous types of computer systems.
One more question here out of the chat, and putting your answer in the context of portfolio management and the investor portfolio, we're used to very hard data in managing that, right? In terms of all the quant figures that you can possibly calculate, which is also, as you explained at the beginning, that's the traditional area where AI, or call them simply algorithms, have been deployed historically. Where do you see the additional application in the portfolio management process where LLMs can be of use?
My view is that within the investment process, LLM can improve a lot on the analysis side, information collection and analysis, and not so much on the portfolio management or decision-making part. Yeah, clearly LLMs are good at analyzing information, summarizing findings, or they can even use some tools to gather information in much efficient way, like we see on for the deep research. But for the portfolio management or actually making decisions, I don't see much improvement using LLMs in these areas. Of course, if we ask ChatGPT to make a comment on my own portfolio and suggest some improvement, ChatGPT will come up with some answer, but I don't trust these answers. I think they typically make up any sort of the suggestions for improvement, but they are not grounded in any reasonable financial theory or the investment theory.
Definitely. Cool. I think we covered all the hot topics. Thank you very much, Kanokogi-san. Excellent presentation. And really appreciate it. After 25 years, we could do something together again. Everybody have a great week. It's going to be very hot in Tokyo for the coming days. Stay cool, and then hopefully we all see each other again in person very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.